This week, on Monday, the House took action on a bill affecting professional boxing and wrestling in Iowa. There's an interesting story, an interesting man behind it.
I'm sure after you tremendous people in Des Moines, Iowa, saw what I did to that big, huge giant. I body slammed him, I drop kicked him, I flying hit him. Race, you're going to get the same treatment.
You know, in Des Moines, the women love me. The husbands are jealous, and the wrestlers are afraid of this fantastic hunk of machinery. But the people in Des Moines are beautiful. They bring their horns in, they holler Bullinski, and it really makes you enthusiastic. How you like that word?
Great.
Right? People, when I come out there, I want to hear, Bullinski!
There once was a fighter named Hayes who boxed in his earlier days. He drafted a bill and marched on a hill and won it in 2 out of 3. What teed off 64-year-old Ralph Hayes was that he couldn't promote wrestling in Iowa. Pro wrestling is about 1% sport, 40% performance, 50% business, and the rest group therapy. The name of the game is getting the wrestlers. Ralph Hayes had worked for wrestling promoters and a few years ago wanted to go it alone. Where they came to loggerheads was in deciding where he would do it. Ralph had some of Iowa's larger cities in mind. The promoters, who control the wrestlers, on the other hand, were thinking more in terms of a town where, during a tag team match, there'd be more people in the ring than around it. Well, Ralph thought that was unfair and made a federal, or in this instance, a state case out of it. The fact that he wanted to settle his beef in the General Assembly does not distinguish Ralph Hayes from 99% of the state. What is remarkable is that he all but pulled it off. This is due in large part to his fortuitous meeting with professional lobbyists. Now, they are those guys at the Capitol who enigmatically smile as if they knew something no one else does, which they do, namely, how the legislative process works. They taught Ralph about committees and subcommittees, and that armed with a few facts and a pleasant demeanor, the average citizen is only a roll call away from participatory democracy.
They were wonderful to me. I didn't know anything. In fact, I lobbied the first 2 months and a half without a lobby card, and finally one of them said, "You got a lobby card?" And I said, "No, what do you have to have? What is that?" And they helped me out then. They were wonderful to me.
Ralph did well for the first time out. In 1971, largely on the strength of his lobbying, the State Boxing and Wrestling Commission was born. Of course, there was no money appropriated to run it, and Melvin Seinhorst, the Secretary of State, got stuck with the commissioner's job. That turned out to be more of a referee's job. 2 members of the advisory board were Ralph Hayes and Alphonse Babe Bisignano, a Des Moines restaurant owner. Babe Bisignano had been a wrestler himself and did not share Mr. Hayes' truculence towards the promoters. Well, the first 2 years of its existence, the most tumultuous sports events were not regulated by the commission. They were in the commission between Ralph Hayes and Babe Bisignano. Recognizing that there is more than one way to pin a promoter, Ralph Hayes went back to the Hill a year ago, this time with a bill called Senate File 86.
Was it the intent of the bill to keep outside promoters out of Iowa?
Well, that's what I thought. I thought that we can't go in their state because all their states say you must be a bona fide resident. Missouri, Nebraska, and all those states. In fact, I copied the Indiana law, word for word, and it said 3 years.
The final bill states that anyone promoting professional boxing or wrestling matches in Iowa must have been a resident for at least 1 year. Since Iowa is not exactly the Borscht Belt of boxing, there have been only 5 legal matches in the state since 1900, and since the only active wrestling promoters are based in surrounding states, the intent of Senate File 86 is clear. A year ago, it was introduced in the Senate and went into the complicated committee process, which is not interesting, and the day before adjournment lurched onto the floor and was, by God, passed by the Senate. Ralph Hayes had completed a miraculous hat trick. That is to say, he had successfully exercised his God-given right as a private citizen to petition the government. This year, the bill showed up in the House of Representatives, and 2 weeks ago came out of committee, was debated, and passed. Last week, they hauled it back for a little rewrite. Representative Phil Hill of Polk County, among others, had noted that there were some questions about constitutionality and a governor's veto. Further immediate implementation of the law would cancel county fair matches already scheduled for next summer. It was also noted that the civ-like wording made it relatively easy for an out-of-state promoter to dodge the residency requirement. They tightened up the language, set a start date in 1975, added a reciprocity clause which allows out-of-state promoters into Iowa only if the promoter's home state replies in kind. The bill finally cleared by a vote of 68 to 14 and is back in the Senate. What follows is an edited version of House members blowing off a little steam about Senate File 86. You will hear a somewhat confusing allusion to pizza pie, which refers to a Register Tribune article that asked Babe Bizignano to comment on Ralph Hayes' apparent success on the Hill. What they could print suggests that, like a good pro wrestling match, the underdog has pulled it off again.
But I think what you're trying to do, you're trying to bring some of these other hoodlums in and trying to get them to have a license. Now, I don't think that is a deal. That bill was passed good enough. The man who worked for it was very diligent, and he worked good. And all of a sudden, we got a bunch of guys here in Iowa now that want to have some hoodlums come in here to run the show. And so what's going to happen? We're going to bow down to their will and say yes.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, as you know, the other day I opposed this bill. I still oppose it, and I want you all to know that I don't even eat pizza. I think Mrs. Lipsky hit the nail on the head when this thing first came out on the floor. It's nothing more than a personal vendetta, and it's been lobbied for several years and has finally made it out. You're asked here to approve a bill to keep out some unknown, evil non-residents from the state of Iowa as concerns boxing and wrestling. No one has even told us that there's a problem in the area that I've heard in the discussions. I think this is one of those bills that the gentleman from Jackson refers to as a rinky-dinky bill.
Now, I don't like the implications that have been cast upon this bill today. I'm no big fan of wrestling and boxing, but I do feel that we should have a sense of fair play, and if this bill passed the other day, it should have more reason to pass today. It did come out of state government, and I didn't think it was any rinky-dink bill.
I would again hope that with the passage of time, some of you might have reconsidered your vote when you voted for this bill originally. I don't think anything can be added to that which Mr. Nielsen said, but I would just urge you to please, please think about what you're doing and vote no on this bill.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Jasper, Mr. Rorda.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, very briefly, this bill is better than it was without the amendment. It is still not good enough to pass this House. I urge your vote against.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Polk, Mr. Jesse.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, regrettably, I was absent on the first occasion when this nonsensical bill passed. It seems clear to me that some of the members of this body are running bills out here for a lark. I can't believe that we're serious about these. People ask me what is happening in the General Assembly, and I confess that I'm forced to admit what is happening. I'd like to share just a few of them. So far, this honorable body has addressed itself to some really monumental topics. We've lowered the speed limit. We've tabled the shooting of mourning doves. We've prohibited wheelies. We have painted sewer grates.
Point of order has been raised.
I believe the man should stick with what's before the House and not be rambling on. If he wants to make a speech someplace, do it on a point of personal privilege.
The gentleman will confine his remarks to the bill.
Or I may do that, too, on a point of personal privilege. In any event, Mr. Speaker, the bill is still constitutionally objectionable. It serves no purpose for this state, and I think it is time this body got down to the business of passing laws that are of merit and will help the citizens of the state and stop the nonsense. I urge you to vote no and get on with important business.
Speaking of business, the fabulous Don Fargo, also known as the Body Beautiful, is taking on Viking, also known as the Good Guy. They were brought to Iowa by one of the three cloven-hooved wrestling outfits who are based in Illinois, Missouri, and Nebraska. None of these states have reciprocity laws. Two of them, Illinois and Nebraska, simply do not allow out-of-state promoters in, while Missouri doesn't care who promotes wrestling as long as they acquire a license and an in-state sponsor for bonding purposes. The promoters themselves endorse the idea of restricting interstate competition, but add that it is difficult to enforce. The problem in Iowa, of course, is that at present, there are not active wrestling firms to protect. Promoters in surrounding states have, in the finest tradition of American business, informally sectioned up the state for fun and profit, but not much. Operating pro wrestling is an expensive proposition. A top performer can earn $100,000 a year. This match was booked by the Gus Karras Company in Missouri. They put on 26 shows in Des Moines last year, and in addition to paying 2 state taxes each time, spent $30,000 at Betts Auditorium and $8,000 at the Des Moines Register and Tribune. The biggest hunk, over half of the promotion dollar, though, goes to TV. That's what spawned wrestling in the first place. And though neither the promoters nor the TV stations will tell you the amount, it is somewhere, conservatively, in the range of an arm and a leg. In short, it is not cheap to get Andre the Giant and Tokyo Joe into the same ring. And that considerable capital requirement is probably why there is no large wrestling promotion outfit in Iowa. If there were, Senate File 86 never would have seen the light of day, and an Iowa firm would be defiling the borders of surrounding states instead of the other way around. Senate File 86 is a tip of the legislative hat to free enterprise in general, and to Ralph Hayes in particular. The promoters say that if it is enacted into law, they will move a man into Iowa, and if that avenue is closed, they'll stay out. As for the legislature, there are a couple of reasons to view this bill with some trepidation. First, there is the ongoing formal assumption that with any sport or game bill, Richard Turner will split a hair and raid a junior league ball or close a church bazaar. And the second concern relates directly to Senate File 86. A, if by 1975 there are no Iowa-based wrestling firms, and B, if by then foreign promoters haven't found a loophole in the law, then C, there may be a temporary dry-up of pro wrestling in Iowa. If that happens, the legislators may be hearing from these kids who know what they like and will not be nearly as polite as Ralph Hayes.